The reason why we're so jazzed about this is Brian Gatewood wrote it, and it stars Juliana Margulies and John Lithgow, and it's very cool. Yeah. So we'll hold for just a little bit. Pam Martucci is going to be joining us a little later, and so is Michael Leonard. I think Charity, are you there, Charity?
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, I see her.
I am. Hi. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you.
Nice to have you with us. This is great. This is great. So let's just go ahead and get started. I want to honor you folks that are here. If we could, a couple of little announcements first. Dr. Sheehan, thank you for the positive review. Dr. Gatewood and my article on the biosocial aspect of creativity in medicine has been published in the Journal of the American Association of Physicians of Indian Origin, the JAAPI. You got a copy, I take it, right, Ken? Did you get a copy by any chance? Ken Schneider? So if not, I'll put the journal in the chat and you can take a look at that. And so thank you for that. So we're really excited about that. And then once again, Dr. Gatewood, son Brian. So this was in my AARP magazine, cover of Gusto, you know. So local person does great stuff. And then we're also continuing when Dr. Mishra comes in. I hope she's able to join us. We're doing a lot of work on the humanism pillar at the School of Medicine. Dr. Gatewood and I are working on that. And Dr. Sheehan, a friend of yours, Dr. What's his last name? Wonderful fellow. You know the name, Robert. Shupka?
Saurabh Sengupta?
Yeah. We're talking. He goes, I got a copy of Create a Flash. So thanks for saying those around. So can we just go around real quick and just do a real quick introduction before I do the formal introduction of our extra special guest, Dr. Gerard Puccio. So Ken, can we start with you, Ken Kamiga?
Sure. Ken Kamiga, owner and president of Granite Corp, focusing on quality, product development, manufacturing, engineering, and organizational development.
And Ken, as you know, was with us a couple of months ago, when we took a look at the quality aspect. Dan Sheehan.
So I'm Dan Sheehan, pediatric pulmonologist. I'm now up here in Rochester. I was Associate Dean for Medical Curriculum back in Buffalo for 7 years before coming here in April. Have been working with the team on thinking about how we bring creativity into medical education, and hope in Rochester, as I see Kelly Moss is on. She's our fellowship coordinator to think about how we bring this into the residency and the fellowship programs here.
Wonderful.
Kelly has a master's in health professionals education.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Welcome, Kelly. Dr. Gatewood.
you know, I was introducing myself as a semi-retired cardiologist, but I'm going to change it. I'm not semi-retired.
No, you're not.
I'm a working cardiologist, and I have to thank and give kudos to Roger and Archana, because they have really been a bright spot in my life recently, bringing the biopsychosocial aspect of medicine front and center, and Roger bringing creativity. So it's really been kind of very, very exciting, and I have to thank you guys for doing that for me. I'm very, very appreciative.
Robert, it's a pleasure. It's an honor. We're just glad to be doing the work. So Gerard's smiling. I come back and I talk to him after our meetings. I was excited about that too. And Gerard goes, "This is just great stuff." So thank you, Robert. So Charity.
Good morning. I'm Charity Bergio. I'm the manager of training and development at Kaleida Health. I was brought into this group by Dr. Snyder and attended Roger's session over at the UB Medical School on the creative problem-solving process. So we like to collaborate and see what we can do for our nurse leaders and our physician leads at all of our hospital sites.
Great, Charity. Great to see you. Thanks. Great to see your name. Great to hear you. So
yeah, my camera doesn't always work well, so
that's okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Well, it's recorded. So Kelly,
okay.
Go ahead. Say hello, would you, please?
Hello, my name is Kelly Moss. Dan did a great introduction of me and who I am. I'm a fellowship administrator here at the University of Rochester. And just looking for ways, like you said, to kind of implement some change into our fellowship programs here.
Great, Kelly. Great. So, Dr. David Yates, want to say a few words from your intergalactic headquarters today?
Good morning, everyone. I am Robin to Roger's Batman, or I'm either maybe Bonnie to his Clyde. Not yet, but I'm here to support Roger in this great organization technologically.
Thank you, Dr. Yates. Thank you, Dr. Yates. And our special guest today, Dr. Gerard Puccio. Dr. Puccio is a distinguished SUNY professor, has been with the center as chairman of the center for 26 years. Is that right, Gerard? Or
That's correct.
Yeah, 26, 27. Just good friend and the developer of the Foresight instrument. This is Gerard's primary area of research, and has really started working on that in the 90s. And was able to partner with Blair Miller, Sarah Thurber, to really move Foresight into the world. Gerard, I don't know how many folks have taken Foresight, and I'm sure you'll give us that number, but and Robert has, well, we have, and he's doing some tremendous work and research on this. And so, Gerard, I'll let you take it from there. And what led us to this was, as you know, Dr. Mishra's presentation, Dr. Khan's presentation last month, where we talked about Foresight and its impact on burnout. And so Gerard has graciously donated the Foresights for the group here. Thank you so much for that. And Charity, Kelly, Pam, if you want to take a look at Foresight as far as getting involved in some of the training work that you're doing, some of the other things along those lines, Robert and Dan, also research. Gerard is very open to doing that. So, Gerard, good friend. Over to you, Dr. Puccio. You have
well, thank you, Dr. Firestein, Roger, and thanks for admitting we are good friends.
Yes.
Earlier, you did not admit that to Ken, so I was hurt. I'm now relieved. Well,
well, so I've known Ken almost as long as I've known you, I think. So.
That's true. Yeah, it does go back to the 80s.
We go back.
Robert, I want to thank you for your partnership with Roger. Congratulations on the article. And I am toying with my own retirement and taking lessons from others. So as you smiled when you said you're not really retired, that gives me great hope, because I am following the mentorship of Roger Firestein, who just won't leave the department. No matter how much I beg him, he will not go away.
I keep showing up. Yeah.
And it's a delight. So I'm here to talk to you about Foresight. Roger alluded to Foresight as my main research focus. This tool, because of its implications and my mission to democratize creativity and put it out into the world and try to connect people to their own creativity. We have an entrepreneurial venture. I sit as a partner on that venture, but my full-time work is as the chair of the Center for Applied Imagination at Buffalo State, the place where brainstorming was born. So our goal is to empower people with their creativity and to help them to better solve complex problems by recognizing their own creative talents. And I have to say, and this is sort of giving the punchline away a little bit, if you participated in the presentation that Dr. Nagma Khan did in January, I will end my presentation by looking at that research. Because I will admit, when Nagma came to me for her master's thesis and said, I want to give Foresight to emergency room physicians at Atlanta's Children's Hospital to look at the relationship between foresight, creative mindset, and burnout, my first inclination was, I'm willing to support you, but I'm not sure what the connection is going to be. But sure enough, of all the variables assessed, including workplace characteristics, Foresight had the strongest predictive value of burnout, which shows the power of the creative mindset. It also shows the power of self-leadership, which is a lesson I just taught last night in my graduate course on change leadership. In order to be effective at leading others, we have to go back to a baseline understanding of ourselves. and understanding our own self-talk and our own mindset. And foresight provides an insight into that mindset, which then allows us to reframe or recalibrate our thinking, which we have control over. So when we get to the end of the presentation, I will share that research with you. I'm not going to assume that everyone who's in this virtual meeting participated in Nagma's presentation and saw that research. But I have to tell you, as a researcher, it's always a delight, right, when you get a surprise result, especially something that was so pervasively as powerful as predicting emotional exhaustion and career success, or the feelings related to career success through a measure that looks at the psychology of creativity. So my presentation today, I'm going to cover a few basics. I don't want to assume we're all on the same page in terms of creativity and creative problem solving. So if you bear with me, I'll cover a few basics. I know, Robert, with all of your background with Roger, you could probably teach that part of the presentation. So if you've been exposed to that before, I'm just going to ask you to kind of look at it in a new way. Then I'm going to move into your results. You were invited prior to the meeting to complete foresight. I have emailed your results to you, and I had completed foresight measures for Pamela, Charity, Dan, Kenneth, Brenda, and Kelly. If you didn't, and Robert, if you held your hand up, you did it twice, I assume, with that. Feel free to do it again. It's on my cost, so feel free to do it again. I will check the administrative site tomorrow, and whoever's gone in and completed it, Dr. Yates will email to you the link again. I'll send to you your results, an interpretive guide, and a personalized slideshow that will take you through your results. So if you did complete it, for example, like Dan, if you would check your email, the email that you used when you registered, was it in there? It comes from an Alex at Foresight. Okay, great.
Dean Parmalee, did you get a chance to take foresight? You're muted, Dean.
Yes, I have it
Great.
right in my box.
Beautiful. Great. Okay, super. Thanks. Good to see you. Good morning, too. Sorry, Gerard, please.
Yeah, no worries. So,
Gerard,
Robert, go ahead.
I did complete it recently for you, Roger, and I turned out to be an integrator, which was a step up. My first one.
Spoken like a true implementer.
I was
take it again. Let's see what happens. Yeah.
Well, Robert, feel free
I'll take it again. I'll take it again.
Feel free. So I'm going to jump into a slide presentation, and I will invite interaction as we go along. But if I don't invite and you wish to jump in, please do. Open mic. It's a small group, so you don't need to raise your digital hand. Just go ahead and jump in and feel free to add a comment, ask a question, or share an insight. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of background. And I'm bringing up my slides, so you should now see, and give me a thumbs up if you don't mind. Do you see my slides?
We see your slides and your notes too.
Oh, and my notes. Okay, so let me stop that then. Let me do it a different way. Just bear with me a sec. All right, let me try sharing this way. You don't want to see all my busy notes.
There we go.
So how does that look? Am I zoomed in on a slide?
Yep, got it.
Okay, awesome. So foresight is a measure of how we approach a challenge. What's behind the foresight measure are these four constructs. So a challenge is a complex problem or opportunity. Let me distinguish that from routine problems, which have a set pathway and a known solution. If you know the formula, the algorithm, you can get to the known solution. It's not terribly tricky and doesn't require higher order thinking. Complicated problems have an uncertain pathway and the solution needs to be discovered. Complex problems are where you work on complicated problems in parallel. You have multiple complicated problems happening simultaneously. And that requires the highest level of human thought, which is creativity. Creativity is the ability to produce something new and valuable. And by the way, many business leaders and government leaders now argue that the #1 success skill in the workplace is creativity, because we live in a world that's rapidly changing, faster than ever before. If you think about, well, if you look at Buckminster Fuller's famous statement in the 20th century, it took roughly every 20 years for knowledge to double. IBM study done in the early 21st century said that knowledge is doubling every 11 hours. That's the world we live in today. So for that reason, creativity has become a highly sought after workplace skill. What is sad is that a Society for Human Resource Management research studies showed that while creativity is in the top 14 employment skills, it is the #1 skill that organizations are not good at developing. They're not good at developing because they don't know how to. We have the good fortune, and you've all been exposed to Dr. Firestein and his training and his curriculum. That's still a fairly niche area, and it's not widely disseminated. I wish every school curriculum across the country had creativity and creative problem solving, because it is so fundamental to the workplace, and we're finding more and more it's related to many other human experiences and outcomes, including mental health and physical health for that matter. Creative problem solving is a methodology, a process that we teach people. It's a proven process of cognitive strategies that help people to find and deliberately produce innovative solutions to complex challenges. So in other words, it moves creativity from chance to a deliberate outcome. So rather than waiting for creativity to land on your shoulder, this is a deliberate way of breeding your own creativity as individuals and in teams. And then you have innovation, which is really taking creativity to scale. It's making it widely distributed and disseminated. So what makes solving complex challenges so hard? Of course, one of the reasons is that you don't have an easy answer. It's an open-ended challenge that requires you to discover a solution, and therefore requires the highest level of human thought, creative thinking. But the other thing that makes it so challenging is that we often have to do this in collaboration with others. And what we now know through research is we don't all think the same way. Ask a question, it's rhetorical. Have you ever been in a meeting where you were there to solve a problem and you felt frustrated, or you felt it was unproductive? I'm sure many of us have had that experience. Robert, I love your smile. You smile all the way through things, because it can be damn frustrating, right? So what often happens when we collaborate together, when we're not following a process, is that individual differences in terms of thinking approach the problem from different angles. It's like 4 horses pulling in opposite directions. So it makes complex problems even more complex because of human nature. So when we look at foresight, and the reason why it's called foresight, we have identified through psychometric analysis, factor analysis, that thinking clusters, creative thinking, can be clustered into 4 areas. Clarifying the problem, and I know Roger has been doing a lot of work in this area, especially in support of medical education. If you can't get the problem right, you can't get to the breakthrough, you can't get to the answer, because how you conceive of the problem influences all of the thinking that happens afterwards. And sometimes it's on target, but if it's off target, it's a huge waste of resources, and of course can have disastrous outcomes. So clarifying is a critical front end stage in the creative process. Once we've clarified the issues or challenges and have come to an understanding and an insight, then we move into ideating, which is playing with possibilities. The creative process doesn't end there. We have to then use our critical thinking to find those options that are most promising and develop those into workable solutions. Investing, this is the sweat equity in the creative process, really honing and crafting and building elegant solutions. And then when you think about the route to creativity, it is to create, is to put things into action. And so a 4th kind of thinking is action-oriented implementation, moving from the drawing board out into reality. So the foresight measure had you respond to a series of 36 questions. Those questions relate to, each question relates to one of these areas within the creative process. So I'm going to ask for a little bit of interaction here. And I suspect, Robert, with all the thinking that you've done around creative process and the medical profession and your work with Roger, you'll be able to jump in and respond to some of these. So I want to look at how these 4 ways of thinking operate in your world, just to sort of build a bridge here so it's not so theoretical. So when we clarify, we're looking at grasping the reality of the situation. We're really trying to understand the variables in the situation. We're gathering information, we're doing research, we're examining where the gaps are, where the problems are, what the issues are. And we're trying to focus on getting the right problem. Because as John Dewey said, a problem well understood is already half solved. So this is the key to the front end of the creative process. So where do you do that in your profession? Can you give me examples? Does clarify?
Sure.
Yeah, Robert.
Well, I'll just make a couple of comments on what you've said, and this has been fantastic already. I'm already, just rehashing this has been really great. Yeah, as far as you said about knowledge, how quickly it's advancing. In 1950, medical knowledge was doubling every 50 years. In 1980, when I started practice, medical knowledge was doubling every 8 years. In 2020, medical knowledge is doubling every 73 days. So that goes to your point, how quickly things are changing and new information is coming out.
Yeah, that's a great example, Rob. And you can, obviously, it's an understatement to say that's an exponential. If you graph that, that's a remarkably sharp slope. Yeah.
The other comment, yeah, I think this goes to Rogers and my article. When you approach, we've kind of expanded our approach to a patient and not think of the patient just from a biological standpoint, but from a psychological, social, environmental, spiritual standpoint. That adds a lot more complexity to both diagnosis and management. And so you have to be, it requires more clarification, more ideation, more development, and more implementation. So all the things that you need for it to be creative are required if you're really going to approach a patient in a holistic way, which is what we're striving for now.
Exactly. And I love that term that you used, in a holistic way, because clarification is about a 360-degree assessment of the current reality. And if you miss a critical piece of information, which could be psychological, sociological, environmental background, that might have been the key to success in terms of treatment.
Yeah. And actually that's, we use a case that, right, Roger, that sort of exemplifies that if we didn't really look at all the pieces. And lastly, I am a poster child for, to show that you can actually, and Roger preaches this, that you can become creative. When I took the foresight test the first time, I was an ideator and an implementer. I completely ignored clarification and development. And that's where I got my nickname Z, because on the graph, it went from down here, up, down here, and back up. So you just turned it on the side and I was Z. The last time I took it, and this is after, hanging around Roger, I became an implementer. So I'm a little bit more well-rounded thanks to Roger.
Well, and Robert, let me just quickly build on that. It's one of the reasons why we think it's so valuable to complete foresight, is to develop an understanding of yourself. As I said before, self-awareness then leads to self-leadership, right? In psychology, we talk about metacognition, being aware of our thinking so that we can better manage our thinking. But if you're not aware of this model and how you fit into it, it's hard to facilitate yourself. So quick story, anyone, this is sort of playing visual Jeopardy. Anyone or a game show recognize that photo? I'm going to tell a quick story about her. Newspaper reporter, Ireland, Dublin. Kate Blanchett, I think, was in a movie where she starred in the role of, this is Veronica Guerin. She was a former accountant. She moved into newspaper as a journalist back in the 80s, 90s. Because of her accounting training, and this is a story about being a creative clarifier, whenever she wrote a story, she put rich detail into the story. And through her clarification, this was a time when there was a massive black market and a real series of horrific crimes and murders that were taking place in Dublin related to this drug market, illegal drug market. Her stories were written in such detail about what was happening that the police were using her stories to make arrests. That's the level of detail that she wrote. Now, sadly, it also resulted in her assassination. But the point is, through clarification, you can bring about creative outcomes. And she was able to do that. So second step or stage in the creative problem solving process is ideation. So once the problem's been clarified and you've moved from a shotgun approach to a rifle approach where you've really zeroed in on the issue that needs to be resolved, we need to now play with ideas and possibilities. So ideational thinking is about dreaming, big picture, what might be possible. It's imagining novel, original responses. It's being playful, it's being abstract in your thinking. It's reaching across and making connections, as Steve Jobs says, that no one else can make. It's spanning boundaries, it's borrowing ideas from other worlds. So in your world, where does ideational thinking, where does it play a role? Where is it important? Again, I want to make sure that we move from theory into your world. And I'll look for someone, because I know Robert will have an answer, but let's allow somebody else to jump in. Where does ideational thinking play a role in your field?
I think with quality improvement, when we're really trying to improve a process, really, when you go playful, you actually pull everybody that has a stake in the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And you get those kind of rich, broad ideas that really allow you to innovate.
Yeah. So at the heart of problem solving, when you're pushing, as you said, Dan, for a new approach and you want to engage people, you open it up to exploring possibilities. So yeah, in that quality improvement, seeking solutions, ideation is essential to that. So here's another, let's name that famous person. I love this photo because that captures an ideator pretty well. You can see the charisma and joy there. Anyone know this individual? Any guesses? Famous composer, reputed to be one of the most influential American composers in the 20th century. Name's John Cage. John Cage, not related to Nicolas Cage, John Cage. So he was really effective at challenging the paradigm. He's well known for what's called the prepared piano, where he would literally take hardware and modify the strings by putting a hammer or a screwdriver or a bolt into the piano to alter the sound of the piano. One of his most famous pieces is called 433, which is a piece where you're sitting in the audience, the conductor comes out and stands in front of the orchestra for 4 minutes and 33 seconds and nothing is played. That's playful. He's challenging the paradigm. He's thinking outside the box, because what he's trying to do is to get people to tune into the natural sounds that are already in their environment. That is an example of creative ideator. All right, so I'll go right to the photo because you'll recognize this guy. Think Oscars last year.
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. So Chris Rock is an excellent example of a highly creative developer. So developer is that stage in the process where you take your ideas and you refine them and you make them more elegant. Chris Rock, before he does a big show like at Madison Square Garden, he'll go to 30 to 40 small venues with a pad of paper, legal size paper with his jokes written out. He'll just show up at an open mic night with his pad of paper. He'll test his jokes and he'll take notes. And he does that 30 to 50 times before a big show. That's developing. So Dan, I'm thinking in terms of quality, right? That's what sort of quality development is. It's refining that initial idea to make sure that it does work. And then we have implement, which is moving things into action. This is the execution of the idea. And often to be successful in terms of the creative process, we need to be clever about implementation. How do we get other people on board? How do we take the right steps in order to get a new idea accepted? Because often when you're introducing novelty, what happens? People warmly embrace it, right? They say thank you for something new. No, often it's rejected. And so we need creative thinking to bring others on board in order to get a new idea accepted. Okay, this is the last story. Anybody recognize this famous entrepreneur? I'm seeing heads. Segway Technology, the auto syringe, iBot. This is Dean Kamen. He is the inventor of all of those. In fact, he's got over 1,000 patents. He started as an entrepreneur in high school. He sold his first business when he was in high school. New Year's Eve, when the ball drops, that was his first business. He was in electronics as a high school student, making over $100,000 a year. So Dean Kamen is a great example of someone who is probably an ideator, but also clearly gets things done, has had multiple businesses and has been successful with all of them. So let's jump to, if you have your graph. So those are quick stories about each of those areas to support the fact that they're all part of the creative process. If you completed Foresight as part of the ramping up for today's session, you will have received a graph in your email inbox that will look something like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at that profile result and help to deepen your understanding of your own creative process. So if you didn't, again, have an opportunity to complete Foresight before today's session, Dr. Yates will send to you the link. Go ahead and complete it. It takes about 15 minutes. And I will check to see when you've completed it, and I'll send your results to you. So let me interpret this. So those of you who complete it, let me say there are no right or wrong answers. There's no failing. It's designed to help you understand yourself. This is a measure of preferences, not ability. Let me say that again. It's a measure of preferences, not ability. So like we have handedness, I prefer to use my right hand. That's what I'm more comfortable with. I can use my left hand, but I have a preference for my right hand. One is not better than the other. It's simply understanding your mindedness. So think about it as a metaphor for handedness, but we're thinking about mindedness, where our energy tends to go, where our cognition tends to be more natural and has a flow, but we all do all four of these things. So if you have your graph and you look at your graph, you'll see a gray bar through the center. This is a standard deviation, which is 5 points. We take that out of the center of the graph. So any plot point above that, we call a peak preference. Any plot point below that is a low preference. Doesn't mean you can't do it. What it means is you tend not to stay there, or you'll move through it quickly, or it could be a blind spot for you. If you look at plot points, and in this example, Rob, probably what your Z-score kind of looked like in first time you took Foresight. This is a high preference for ideating and a high preference for implementing. Many people have a combination of high preferences or a combination of low preferences. High preferences represent where you get the greatest energy or where you enjoy putting the most energy into the creative process. So the 6 folks who completed the profile before this morning, I graphed your group results. So these were the 6 who completed it up through to yesterday afternoon. These are frequency counts. We had 3 integrators, 3 out of 6. We had 1 high clarifier, 2 low clarifiers, 1 high ideator, 2 low developers. So the plots going above this gray bar show the number of high preferences, plots below show the number of low preferences. We had 2 high implementers and 1 low implementer. Again, we had 3 integrators. Integrators, I would encourage you to look at your graph, and there's something that we call shadow preferences. And it may be within your profile, you'll see some variation where a plot point is beginning to move to the top end of that gray bar or move to the bottom end of that. If you see that, that is what we refer to as a shadow preference. So you might have inclinations and leanings within that profile, that integrator profile. So I'm going to take us into each of these areas. So looking at your graph, if you have a high plot point for clarifying, this is likely to describe that kind of individual. And if you have an integrating profile, you might find, again, that if you're moving towards the top of that zone or the bottom of that gray box, this may fit you as well. So what do we know about clarifiers? They're highly focused. They're orderly. They tend to be deliberate in their thinking. They tend to be more serious. They're organized. What they need, so thinking about this when you're working with others, they need to know the history, right? They'll ask lots of questions. They need the facts. They need an understanding of the history. They need access to information, and they need to be able to ask questions. Now, my lowest preference is around ideating, but I also have a low preference around clarifying and a very high preference for implementing. I am that person who went to the appliance store, fell in love with the stainless steel refrigerator, had it delivered to my home because I fell in love with it and it didn't fit in the space. Someone who's high in clarifying, that would never happen to you, right? I fell in love with it. I immediately implemented. Damn, I got to action too quick. So clarifying prevents those kinds of issues, right? High clarifying. But there's a downside. High clarifiers can annoy others by asking too many questions, by being too realistic, by pointing out the obstacles, not identifying what's been thoroughly thought through, overloading people with information, or being too realistic. So here's a chance to share some stories. Do you know, or can you relate to this description of this mindset? Anyone have any of this resonate with you, or can you think of, because what a good theory, of course, helps you to do is to then frame the world and better understand others that you interact with.
This is Pam, and I'm laughing to myself a little because I work with the high clarifier and I'm a very high implementer. And only recently have I begun to acknowledge that we're a great team because, you know, while he's identifying problems and really beating up ideas, he's doing a service that we're making sure before I go and implement that we have a solution that's actually going to work. So it's funny, we were doing our performance reviews and I've really been reflecting, and this gives a great sort of paradigm in order to describe that dynamic between us.
That's a beautiful story, and also highlights the teams. Minbasser did research on this. Teams that are most successful over time are diverse, and they're diverse in lots of ways. And one of the ways that diversity pays off is psychological diversity, right? That you complement one another's thinking. And Pam, your story really reflects that. So that's beautiful. I see Michael's question, which I will circle back to about the profiles, but I'll go through ideate, develop, and implement. Michael's question in the chat box was about how stable the profiles are. I'm going to move to the...
Sure, thank you so much for acknowledging that. And just to answer the question you just asked, I actually have a very similar experience to what Pam just described. One of the folks on my team is a high clarifier, and in my role for the organization, especially over the past few years, the primary thing we've had to do is implement.
Yeah.
So he's kind of the guy who points out, hey, did you think about this? Hey, what about that? Again, very similar to Pam, even as soon as 5 years ago, that was annoying. Now I'm realizing how valuable that is as we move forward. He's almost like my Jiminy Cricket as I move forward. But interestingly, in other situations, so when I'm working with folks that I report to, I find I'm often the clarifier for them because they're looking at a bigger picture and have larger implementation responsibilities than I do. And I need to make sure that they have thought of X, Y, and Z before they. So that actually was kind of where my question stemmed from. It's absolutely fine to wait till later to.
Yeah, I will circle back to that once we look at all four, but that's a great observation. And this, I'll give the abbreviated response to that is we all have a natural home base, but humans are highly flexible, and we can thankfully adapt our thinking, better said, adapt our thinking to the situation in terms of what the situation needs. And it sounds like your example sort of underscores that there in terms of yourself and your interactions with others, but as you move into a slightly different role, you recognize the need to clarify. But in general, the theory shows that these remain relatively stable, but we can, thankfully, because we're a successful species in terms of adapting to environments. So I think I just answered that question now that I reflect on my elaboration. Hopefully that helps you, Michael.
It does a lot. Thank you.
So ideating, and Michael, you're also making me think. We did because we have 200,000 people who've completed Foresight. We invite people to participate in a demographic study voluntarily. We've had nearly 30,000 people who've voluntarily participated in that, and we see relationships between Foresight preferences and occupation. So clarifying, we find predominant in occupations like finance, which requires a lot of detail, focus on numbers and metrics. Ideating, we find a lot of consultants, folks in marketing often come out as high ideators. Ideators are, of the four preferences, the most global thinkers. They're imaginative, social, adaptable, flexible, adventurous, very independent-minded, the sort of person who you might go to and ask for some thinking or an idea, and they're able to provide a flood of ideas. And then they continue to think about the situation and might email you some ideas later because they continue to think about the challenge that you posed to them. Look at your plot point in your profile if you have your profile. So ideators, when they're working with others and need room to play, they need constant stimulation, they need variety and change, and they need to know what's the vision, what's the dream, what's the big picture. When working with others who are not like them, because they tend to be more adventurous and independent-minded, they might draw attention to themselves, Roger Firestein, or they might be impatient when others, did I say that out loud? Others might become impatient with them. They might offer ideas that are off the wall or too abstract. They might find it difficult to stick to one idea. This, I'm not going to go into this research, but high ideating happens to correlate with ADD and ADHD. So one of the things, the mission that we're on is to replace some of the pejorative negative labels with more positive labels, because there's some beautiful things that come along with that way of thinking, and ADD, ADHD feels more like a pejorative label. So where does ideating happen for you all? Does any of this resonate? Your chance to jump in with the story in terms of revealing some things about yourself or projecting on others? Can anybody think of an ideator in your life?
Gerard, while folks are thinking, I'm actually so glad you made that point a moment ago about labels like referring to somebody as ADHD and OCD and those things, while that's become part of the vernacular, I just read an article recently, I think it was actually in Business Insider, that talked about how even though it's not intended to be, pejorative, we're talking about clinical and mental health diagnoses. So I love the idea of kind of switching the verbiage to something that's much more positive and something that, other folks may not take even, again, unintended as offensive. So this is great.
Yeah. Well, and that, I like to think in terms of polarities. There's an upside and a downside, and we're not necessarily trapped by those things. But unfortunately, a label can become pejorative very quickly, which feels limiting rather than empowering. I think ideating is more empowering than saying, I'm stuck. I have ADD or ADHD. You mentioned obsessive compulsive disorder. That happens to correlate to the third preference, which is developing. Developing, or those who have a high preference and calling them developers, tend to be more reflective, careful, pragmatic, planful, patient, dedicated, discerning. They use their critical thinking to identify shortcomings and gaps, and they're really good at perfecting ideas. So they find a lot of engineers show up as developers, which makes sense, right? We need them to make sure they're paying attention to all of the details so buildings don't collapse and bridges don't collapse. What they need when they're working with others is an opportunity to consider all the options, time to craft their ideas. They don't want to be rushed. When they're working with people who are not like them, they can come across as being too nitpicky, finding flaws in others' ideas, getting locked into one approach. And their main challenges as perfectionists, they can become stuck in a bit myopic in developing an idea. So developing in terms of anyone who resonates with this preference or thinking about others in your world who might show these tendencies, any stories?
I'll just jump in real quick. I have an artist friend who is an extraordinary portrait artist, but he has a very hard time finishing his portraits because there's always more detail to add and more detail to add and more detail to add. So he's also the guy that reads the directions to everything. So
yeah. Once a trainer was sharing a story with me about himself and said, yeah, that fits me perfectly, had a high plot point for developing, and said, I can't stop developing my PowerPoint. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm still working my PowerPoint slide deck for my presentation at 8 o'clock, which I thought was a lovely story about developing. Implementing, this is the, Robert, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I find this interesting because I am a perfectionist. In fact, I'm working with my psychologist on this, and I have a book too that I just bought, The Perfectionist Guide to Losing Control. Anyway, but I am as much of a perfectionist that I am. I'm not really a real high
Developer.
Yeah, and so I find that kind of unusual, I guess.
Yeah,
I should be a developer, but I'm not. I'm not to the point that I should.
Yeah. Well, it could be, you also mentioned before that you have a tendency towards implementation. It may be the interaction between the two, where the implementation drive will move you forward outside of the tendency to get stuck, right, and rigid about perfection. I suspect, I don't know, Robert, just based on what you had shared earlier, which brings me to the fourth preference, implementing, which is that individual who's persistent, decisive, determined, assertive, wants to move forward, action-oriented. When working with others, they need to know that others are moving as quickly as they are. They need timely responses to their ideas, and they need to have a sense of control in terms of the process. They can annoy others thinking about collaboration by coming across as being pushy, readily expressing their frustration when others aren't moving as quick as they are, overselling their ideas. And of course, the watch out is they might leap into action too quickly. So does that resonate with anyone, or can you imagine people like this that you collaborate with? Dan, I saw you smiling, so I'm gonna pick on you. You shouldn't.
Yeah, you know,
The nonverbal was so strong.
As we go through this, what I like about this is that, you know, I think I've taken the disc like 4 times, and we often do it with leadership development, strategic planning, and team building. And you know, the disc is regarding communication style, whether you're dominant, influencer, I think stable and conscientious are the other two. And you can kind of see how like a high implementer would be a dominant, often a dominant personality. The you know, the ideator might be that influencer, and the clarifier and development are somewhere between the S and the C. And what I like about this is, you know, we do need to work on our communication style, but we can reframe things by looking at every individual as, thanks, Mike, looking at everybody as creative and trying to pull those forward in a very positive way in a team, and kind of, you know, either combine the two or do a foresight instead.
Yeah. And what's beautiful about foresight too is that then, as Roger has been doing with Robert and others, is that you have a curriculum that's been around for 50 some years that you can move from the so what to the now what. So now let's learn some tools, because if this is not your personal preference, humans are tool makers, learn a tool that makes that way of thinking easier. So that's one of the beautiful things about foresight, to build on your observation. So I'm going to share 2 more slides that are going to move into the research on foresight and physician burnout. So looking at this group, with the 6 who completed foresight before this morning, half the group came up as having equal preferences across all 4. We call that an integrator. Integrator is not simply an amalgamation of all 4, but because of that interaction, it produces some unique qualities. They have steady energy across all 4 preferences. They tend to be very flexible. And because of the amalgamation of these 4 preferences, they're really concerned about group harmony, right? They're concerned about relationship and including others, inclusivity. They can bridge style differences. They often become mediators in teams. Might sound like a perfect profile, but the risk for an integrator is they can become pleasers. They lose their voice because they are so easily accommodating of others. I'm going to jump now to Nagma's research. And again, this is my 32 years of doing research work. This is my new favorite research study, simply because when Dr. Khan came to me, I wasn't sure how foresight was going to relate to physician burnout, which of course is a big issue in the healthcare field. And I know someone mentioned earlier about nurses. This is certainly true. From what I understand, especially coming off of COVID, the impact that has had on the nursing profession. So Nagma was interested in foresight and pediatric emergency room physicians and their burnout. What we looked at as variables in terms of mindset, we looked at foresight. The BMI is a measure of burnout in the healthcare field. If you're not familiar with it, it measures 3 variables: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment, which is a positive variable, which helps us to be resilient against burnout. And then we also looked at work characteristic, hours worked per week, years in practice, and whether they were on the clinical or on the research side of the house. Emotional exhaustion was not predicted by hours worked per week. I was surprised by that, because we hear about job characteristics and we think immediately of we're overworking ourselves. That did not turn out to be a predictor. Years in practice was a predictor of emotional exhaustion. The longer the term in the profession, the lower the emotional exhaustion. And this is interesting from a foresight perspective, and this was a stronger predictor, and this blew my mind. The higher the physician's score for clarifying, the more they reported emotional exhaustion. So the more their mind wanted to spend time knowing, the more they reported emotional exhaustion or burnout. And we did, if you're interested in the statistics, a regression analysis on this. And if you look at predicting emotional exhaustion, years of practice, total hours worked, and then the 4 foresight preferences, you'll see looking along, the strongest predictor in terms of level of significance was the clarifying score, which is incredible to me, that mindset. But then again, if you look at self-leadership and we look at how we frame the world, we don't have the same experience. Our experience of the world is largely determined upon what's happening inside of our own psychology. And so clarifying that need to know, I suspect, can feel emotionally frustrating in a high-paced environment where you may not have the time that you wish you had to clarify. We did not find a relationship with depersonalization, but we did find a relationship with personal accomplishment. And neither years in practice or hours worked per week predicted personal accomplishment. That's that sense of fulfillment through your work. But what did was ideating. And that was a positive relationship. So as a physician's score for ideating went up, so did that sense of personal accomplishment. So that ideating, again, is that that big picture thinking, more aspirational, more optimistic, more related to intrinsic value and drive. And that was a stronger predictor of personal accomplishment. I thought years in practice would be a predictor of personal accomplishment. That's what I had hypothesized. And as a researcher, it's fascinating when your hypotheses don't pan out. Instead, it was ideating. Again, if you like statistics, this is a regression analysis. Looking at the last column in terms of significance, you see the ideating score was significantly related to personal accomplishment. So I'm gonna stop there and just open it up because we only have a few minutes left. Roger mentioned earlier, Foresight is interested in continuing this research, and as the head of R&D at Foresight, we would love to partner with someone and make Foresight freely available. If anyone is interested in using Foresight in your organization for research purposes, we'd love to partner with you. For a couple of reasons. One, to put Foresight in more people's hands and heads, but also to extend the research. So I'm just open that up as an invitation. And you can let Roger know if you're interested in that. Michael, I see your digital hand up.
No, thanks, Gerard. It's actually funny. Dan and I were just chatting that, you know, we need to figure out how we can integrate a lot of this great work into things that we already have going within our organization. So yeah, Roger, we'll definitely be in touch.
Great,
Yeah,
good.
yeah,
good.
super. So if you see an opportunity, we're chomping at the bit to collaborate. Nagma's research really opened up the door, and we'd like to take it a step further. So.
Yeah, so real quick, so collaborate, one of my favorite words. As Dan mentioned, you know, we do use DISC quite a bit within our organization. So I do see the parallels and the, you know, kind of building upon that, expanding it, you know, however that looks, which I think is a whole fascinating discussion in and unto itself. And in a burnout, and I don't think we're unique in this, you know, it's a hugely hot topic right now.
Yeah.
So I think anything that we can do to not only identify and measure it, but also, and more importantly, I realize the irony of saying this, but implement strategies that help address that, you know, again, I think is wonderful. So
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure, of course.
Gerard, that was absolutely fantastic. Really unbelievable. Thank you for the presentation. And to jump on what Michael said, yeah, I two things. One is I've done both, as I mentioned, a Foresight as well as DISC, and I find them very complementary. We used them in our practice, and this goes back to what Pam said earlier, is that it's not only knowing about yourself, but it's also recognizing the qualities in your colleagues.
Yeah.
And it makes you understand each other much better. And I found it to be very, very helpful in our own large practice, because once we understood each other, we were able to communicate and get things done much better. The other thing I wanted to comment on is I'm not surprised, if I understand your research correctly, that if you're a clarifier, that you're more prone to burnout. And I'm thinking, if I'm a clarifier and all I'm thinking about is is that problem and not being able to move off that into, some action, that can be very, very frustrating and loss of control and all those sorts of things. So I'm not surprised at all that a clarifier is going to be more prone to burnout.
Yeah, and interesting, related to emotional, there's an emotional cost. And Robert, I can kind of hear you alluding to that in your description. Yeah. This came up a number of times. We did a study correlating DISC with foresight. Dan, I should have interviewed you before we did that study. You nailed the findings, basically. I think the power, I like DISC. I think the advantage, and I believe in having multiple profiles. The advantage of foresight is it's easy to draw the language into the workplace and process and talk about, in terms of metacognition as a group, have we done enough clarifying? Maybe we need to do some ideating now. It's just easy to bring that language into how you manage collaboration when approaching problems.
Gerard, it's Charity. Just a quick question along that same thinking. If I rated high in implementer, which wasn't something I really thought would be my highest. So does burnout correlate to things that maybe were not your natural tendency, but because of the environment you're in, you've had to adapt to that style? And so does that lead to burnout? Because it's kind of not meshing, and that correlates to DISC too. I think environment has to affect that and increase the odds of burnout.
Yes, exactly, Charity. So real quick, that's called person environment fit. So you can map a profile onto the situation, and where there's a poor fit, you can predict higher levels of stress and lower levels of satisfaction. So that could be part of the conversation when you're debriefing foresight, is to think about how your environment or the situation places demands on you in terms of these 4 ways of thinking and how you match the situation.
Yes.
Which could be another reason why high clarifying leads to emotional exhaustion in the ER scenario, because you've got to take action quickly. You don't have the time maybe that you want to have. And so that high clarifying doesn't mesh well with the circumstance.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you so much. This was really amazing.
So I know we were going to go to 9. We're a few minutes after 9. Raj, I give it to you.
Want to just check in on something here. These topics generally tend to emerge as things move along here. We target, Jerry, the 3rd Thursday of the month, which would be March 23rd. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I will put you on the spot, Gerard. Is there a possibility that you might be available on the 23rd to take this foresight step 2? Because the interaction, what do you think, guys? Does that take a second pass at this? So, because to take a little bit more, Robert doesn't want to. Okay.
Well, if we do, I'll check my calendar, but I can start that conversation by looking at the correlations between foresight and mental health, because we have a study that looked at foresight correlated with obsessive compulsive disorder, with premeditation, with anxiety, and I can kind of kick off the conversation with that, and that might lead to, we don't have to take the whole hour. We can take whatever time folks want.
Well, I just think too that, Gerard, that this group, the discussion from this group is just so rich, and you've done a wonderful job of really making the foundation. And I would just want to also thank you for great presentation. I'm loving this. And you got a ton of information out in a very short period of time, very succinctly. So you rocked it, my friend. And so, if you would look at your calendar, March 23rd, or if that doesn't work, we could maybe do March 30th or something. But we try to do this slot, and then we'll get the date out to you. And I'm just seeing a lot of energy around this, and I think that might be something kind of fun to take a little bit further. So,
well, the 23rd works.
Okay, that's it.
I'd be happy to come back if
all right,
are interested.
You guys sound good? Yeah. Everybody.
Thanks again, Gerard.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
my
don't think
pleasure.
Robert wants to do that, but
Yeah,
you know.
thank you, Gerard. Very
Yeah.
nice. Thank you.
Beautiful job.
Welcome.
Beautiful job. Thank you so much. So good stuff. So Gerard, have a great day. I'll catch up with you a little bit later. Okay, so everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you, Charity. Come back on the 23rd. So we'll put the meeting announcement out for March 23rd. Dr. Yates, I'll get something to you on that. Ken lets you and I check in for breakfast, and Robert lets you and I
Okay.
check in for coffee. Ken lets you and I check in to make the great book exchange. So
Okay.
and Dr. Yates, may the force be with you. Live long and prosper. All right.
Take
Thank you,
care,
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gerard.
Have a good
Fantastic.
morning.
Fantastic.
Have a good morning.
Thanks. Gerard, can you stay on for a second?
Yeah.
Okay. So